Shawn Fluharty is here. Shawn is a local attorney, a very fine local attorney. He's also a Democrat and a candidate here in the 3rd House District. And Shawn, welcome back to the program.
Good afternoon, Steve. How you doing? How you doing, Lola?
I'm good, Shawn.
You're fired up today.
She's fired up most of the time.
She is.
It's beautiful. She does. I mean, she's on since noon. She does 3 different personalities for 3 different shows.
That's right.
How many Red Bulls have you had today?
I don't think she's a Red Buller.
Yeah, I had a Red Bull the other day.
See, she's a Red Buller.
Came in. Well, it was Ron L. Green and the Bull came in. So they had Red Bull. Oh my gosh. Going, wow, no wonder my blood pressure.
Just stick with the cupcakes, kid. Stick with the candied hams. Don't go Red Bulling. I never went Red Bulling. I was a Mountain Dew kind of guy because I don't drink coffee, and now that's gone. That's gone. It's chocolate milk and then water most of the day. And then I may, have a beer while I'm watching the battle in Buckos. Shawn, welcome back to the program. I do appreciate it. The primary just 2 weeks away, my man.
I know. It's really speeding up. That clock ticks fast. It was a shock when I saw 2 weeks. I was like, wow. But yeah, you got to get ready. You got to go.
Yep. And I heard the radio spots begin. Tell me about your campaign the last couple of weeks. You going to pound the pavement?
I have been. Actually, yesterday I was pounding the pavement there in the drizzle, and I had my first offer of bean soup as I was strolling the streets of Woodsdale. So they get a lot of nice people out there, and they invite you in, and they say, hey, what are you doing out here in the rain? Well, the clock's ticking. We're 2 weeks away. You don't have a choice at this point.
So what are people saying to you?
Well, they have a lot of concerns. Mostly, I've seen it kind of transform through the years. As you know, I've been involved in the politics now for a few years. And the main concerns now are keeping young people here. They see me, and they want to associate me with somebody that's not from the typical generation that runs for office, and they're concerned about that, and they're concerned about the oil and gas industry, all the trucks on the roads, and how are we profiting from it? What are we going to do in the future about it? And that's conversations that I'm mostly having.
Now, when they say, hey, are we getting enough? Maybe there's enough people out there smart enough to listen to the Watchdog Network from Sammy and Howard all the way up through this show. And I've jumped on board the Howard Monroe bandwagon. I really think it's time for the state of West Virginia to increase the amount of severance tax collected from the gas and oil companies.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I discussed that with Howard on his little TV segment that he had the other day, and we've discussed it in the past. And if you look at the numbers, we're well below the market average right now as far as what we're deriving in income from the severance tax. Statutorily, we're at 5%, but when it comes to the net effect of that, the Budget and Policy Office in West Virginia tells us that it's about 3.5% roughly. And if you look at other states, New Mexico is roughly 17% of their budget. And Oklahoma, it's about 11%. In West Virginia, it represents 10% of our total budget. But now when you look at the way things are going, we're deriving less from coal in the severance tax area and more from oil and gas. And, the same people who argue that we shouldn't raise taxes on anything, well, this is a situation where we should, and it's a severance tax. And I look at it as pure capitalism. The state of West Virginia has a commodity that's rich. Let the market dictate it, and you raise the tax up, and if you start scaring people away. Believe me, we're not going to. Chevron makes billions, Chesapeake makes billions. They're not going anywhere.
No,
that
they're
gas
not.
Isn't going anywhere. So for us just to sit back and repeat history, which we do in many areas, it's really frustrating, and that would be one of the first things I would do if elected.
Well, and Shawn, I'm on board with that. I'm not a big tax guy. I'm not going to sit here and suggest that we start taxing the citizens. But the oil and gas companies, that's a different animal.
The people already pay their fair share.
That's right.
We have a deficit. We're dipping in the rainy day fund right now to budget ourselves. So what's the next move? It's going to be to tax the people, and that's not what should happen.
No, it's not. Not when you have trillions being made. Okay, and once upon a time ago, it was only in Wetzel County here in West Virginia. It has certainly spread. Drilling the Marcellus is now taking place in 21 counties across the state of West Virginia. We know over the more west you get into Belmont County, up in Harrison County, and pretty much up in Jefferson County, they're not just drilling the Marcellus, they're also drilling the Utica. And over here, we have the Marcellus. Yes, we also have another shale play that's not made a whole heck of a lot of news, and that's called the Devonian. So I think it's time. I truly do. Now, how long have we been covering these industries, Lo? Now, 5-6 years? Yeah. Okay, and first it was about getting the contract signed. We really didn't see it. People were just wondering, Novotney, what are you talking about? What's going on? And my advice to everybody was, go down to Wetzel County like I did. And then it eased up north. And now Marshall County, holy cow, it's a mecca. I just had Tom Hart on yesterday. In the last 4 months, 20 new pads. More pads coming.
Yep.
Never dormant in Marshall County. It was a little dormant here in Ohio County, but that's because we have one driller. They have 7. We have Chesapeake. They've got 7 different ones down in Marshall County.
And for once, I'd like to see the state be ahead of these companies. The companies come in first. What they did was they took advantage of the individual person that were signing leases.
That's right.
That's the first thing they did. They came in and they had you sign a lease for a nominal amount and promised you the world and granted you nothing. And they're trying to have these leases continue in perpetuity forever for under these horrible terms. And then they start taking advantage of the fact we're allowing them to basically use the roads with no repercussion whatsoever, which if you recall, Steve, when I first ran for office, I proposed the idea of an environmental assessment.
Yes, you did.
As part of the permit process. So we can have a starting point of the conditions of the waterways, the roads, et cetera, whenever these companies come in and start drilling and get their permit process. We didn't do that. New York has done that, and they did it for a good reason. We have refused to do that because, like West Virginia always does, we're behind the times when it comes to being proactive.
West Virginia is very reactive, very, very, very infrequently proactive. And it's costing us right now. It's costing our state billions of dollars.
And that's one of the reasons why I was triggered to run for office. Steve, I can recall whenever I was a senior, I actually graduated undergraduate. I got a journalism degree in West Virginia University, and I graduated early. I completed my semester requirements in 3.5 semesters, so I can, in my 4th semester, my final one, I spent it in the West Virginia legislature as an intern with a lobbying firm. And I'm down there, and I had just returned from the Sugar Bowl, where in 2006, Rich Rodriguez, who is a Benedict Arnold to the state of West Virginia now, but Rich Rodriguez at the time took us down there, and we got a 38-35 victory over Georgia. And we were elated, as West Virginians do, we rallied behind our state. But at the same time, we were mourning the tragic incident at Sago Mine. Now, the Sago Mine tragedy, at the time when I was a younger guy down there in Charleston, I was really absorbing the political process firsthand. And I was a little dumbfounded at the fact that we had the Sago Mine tragedy, we had Joe Manchin and his crew in there, and they have this like ticker tape parade following the tragedy of this new legislation. And the new legislation allowed for a new air ventilation system underground mines, new requirements for companies to have. And I thought to myself, why are we celebrating the fact we're just now passing the legislation? Where were you beforehand? Why weren't people forward thinking? And at the end of the day, it's because the state's controlled by corporations and companies and always has been. And the average person doesn't have a voice. And that was a concern for me, and it was one of the reasons why I decided to run for office.
All right, we're going to continue our conversation here in a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Shawn Fluharty is here. Again, a very fine local attorney, a Democrat, and a candidate to represent you and I right here in the 3rd District in the House of Delegates. And that 3rd District right here in Ohio County. We'll return in a moment. 61 degrees in downtown Wheeling. It's 59 up to Highland, 60 degrees down in Moundsville. We'll return in a moment. I'm Steve Novotney right here on the Watchdog Network. AM 1600 WKKX, AM 1370. Yeah, 1370, right? I'm just kidding. WVOY. Shawn Fluharty is here. Shawn, again, a local attorney. He is a Democratic candidate to represent you and I right here in the 3rd House District in Ohio County. And before we continue our conversation about, pounding the pavement and the big old issues that you're hearing the most about, campaign signs has made news. Now, Tim Birch, one of the candidates for Board of Education here in Ohio County, Tim's going to join me tomorrow at 4:30. We'll talk a little bit about this torched sign. I mean, I've heard signs be pushed down. I've had to report on signs being just removed. People have cut faces out of signs here in Ohio County. I don't get this, but now we're setting signs on fire. I hope it's a kid and not a competitor.
I would assume that's probably what it is. I mean, I saw that this morning, the story on it. Somebody was engulfing a sign. I've never really dealt with too much vandalism. It's really to be expected, I guess, a little bit. You have these signs littering the area. I'm not a real big fan of them myself. I'm running for office. But I had one that was cut up, and that was the most I've ever had. But, if you're going to vandalize a sign, let's get creative with it. If you're going to cut up my sign, cut out something cool with, that's funny. But
right.
You're just going to cut it to cut it. That's really not doing anything.
Yeah, you're not doing any good. And sometimes I think, why do we even have these roadside campaign signs? I mean, you get in the legal areas, they're so crowded, you see 15 to 20 of them, and it's not, it has nothing to do with issues. It's all about name recognition. And I find that to be a shame.
That's a pet peeve of mine, Steve. As you know, I'm all about talking the issues, and I like to think I know them very well, and I do my homework, and I pride myself on it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to more pageantry than policy, and that bothers me a little bit. But you gotta learn to play the game a little bit. But I'm not really good at playing the game when it comes to that. But you gotta have the name recognition out there, and that's what it's for. But I keep my signs out of the public roadways. I don't put them on public property, and that's maybe why you don't see as many as mine as some competitors. But it's kind of just the way it is.
I got you. Now, Shawn, back to you going door to door. I know that you heard about the gas and oil and all the traffic and everything, but what about the condition of our state's roads? They're just ridiculous.
And it's not just an Ohio County problem either. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
I was in Morgantown recently, and the roads there were awful. Marshall County's in bad shape, and we know who the culprit is at this point, and what has changed throughout the years, especially in the last year or two, that wasn't here before, and that's all the trucks from the oil and gas industry. And who's paying the bill right now? I mean, Chesapeake cutting checks? I don't see that happening. I haven't seen anything come across the newswire that says Chesapeake allocates $500,000, $1 million to pave Ohio County roads. No, I don't see that, but that's where the severance tax comes into play again, and that's who needs to be held accountable.
Right now, the state of West Virginia raises money for our roadways in one way, and that's the tax on gas. And that has been frozen for several years. Now, Senate President Kessler got his future fund through, and I was kind of hoping that, a portion of that futures fund, very different than his original idea. Now it's not 20 years, now it's 6. But I was hoping that somebody would what a horrible regular session anyway by the West Virginia legislature, and not just because of the water contamination. It just seemed like it was nothing but, especially in the House of Delegates, election year politics.
It was, and it kind of mirrored the national scene. And that's bothersome because we've kind of been immune to that in the state of West Virginia. But now it's trickling down to the local politics and state politics, and nothing's getting done at the end of the day. And that's horrible. It's the way of the world now in politics, and I really don't understand it. And how can you say it's election year politics, but then you have nothing to run on because nothing gets done? So nothing was proposed. The only thing I got through with any promise really was the future fund, and I applaud Senator Kessler for not stopping. That wasn't his first crack at it.
No, it was not.
One of the few times where the legislature looks to the future, which is a good thing.
Love the flood insurance bill.
Rocky did a great job with the flood insurance.
Absolutely. And they both did, Delegate Erica Storch had the House, Senator Fitzsimmons had the Senate concerning the TIF expansion up at the Highlands. I thought that was key. I don't blame the horrible regular session on our local folks, not all of them anyway, but I do blame it on all this election year everybody just cares about their little $15,000 and their cool little license plate and their neat little parking spot right next to the Gold Dome, and they care about those things more than they do the people they represent.
You're exactly right, Steve. I can recall when I was interning down there, I had to park further away. So I had to walk across the parking lot and see all these license plates. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'll give it away to an intern if I make it down there. I like the extra walk. It's healthy.
All right, now what about gas and oil? We've already covered severance taxes. Okay. We've already covered the severance taxes, but we've not talked about regulation. I mean, still to this day, nobody has to know anything about where pipelines are going into the ground.
Well, we'll just do typical West Virginia fashion. We'll wait until something happens. We'll wait until there's an episode where somebody gets hurt or killed, and then we'll pass some legislation that's meaningful and has some bite to it. That's typically how it happens. That's how it happened with the chemical bill.
Right.
And if you recall how the chemical bill was just passed this last legislative session, there was a secret meeting with the governor. And who wasn't in there? I mean, the oil and gas industry was in there. The chemical industry was in there. But who wasn't in there? The average lobbying group for the average person. They weren't invited. And that's troublesome because that's just politics as usual in the state of West Virginia.
A lot of times, Shawn Fluharty, people think lobbyists are evil. And I'm here to tell everybody, it's the few bad apples in the bunch, truly, that gives lobbyists that bad name.
It is, yes, absolutely.
All right, let's go to the phone lines. We have Bob Lowe. All right, let's go to Bob. Bob, welcome to the program. Please say hi to Shawn Fluharty.
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
How you doing, Bob?
2 questions. The brought up lobbyists again. You said you worked for a lobbyist down in Charleston.
I worked for a lobbying firm, Charles Ryan Associates. I was a journalism major in PR, and naturally that's what they do. I worked for the West Virginia School Board Association, in which I wrote the legislative roundups at the end of session days, and I attended the Senate hearings for the Education Committee.
Okay, I don't think Mr. Novotney and I are going to agree, but what do you feel about lobbyists?
I think lobbyists is part of politics. Lobbying is. I'd like to see lobbyists not have as big of a role as they have, and I saw that role down there firsthand. That's why I'm running for public office and not pursuing a career as a lobbyist, because I know I'm better served to serve the people that way. And, I know that that's part of it. I know that there's good and bad, and sometimes as a whole, a few can make it seem worse than it is. But I do think they have too strong of a game, and like I just said, the average person doesn't have a lobbyist group. That's a problem. That's why you got to elect people that you know will be your voice for you, and not somebody who's just a mouthpiece for a corporation.
Right, but lobbyists to me equals money.
And the money can come from any group. It can come from a citizens group. It can come from a particular corporation. Depends how that's divided up.
And that's my point, Bob. There are good lobbying firms and bad lobbying firms, and it's the bad ones that buy out politicians, that give the politicians and those businesses the bad name, and now everybody thinks lobbyists are bad and evil.
I think the lobbyists should be void of giving any money. That would stop the whole works. You wouldn't even have a lobbyist if you didn't have money to give to the politicians.
Well, Bob, there we agree. I hate PACs. I'm not a big fan of lobbyists giving or buying out politicians or anything. I'm a fan of the lobbying groups that do represent the public interest and not just another way to generate more money.
Well, I agree with you. If they're for the public interest, go for it. But how do you differentiate it between them?
You got to educate yourself.
But, I mean, how do you differentiate who should be allowed to give people money to vote their way versus people who, they're all given money. That's obvious.
Well, not all lobbying firms cut big checks. Some lobbying firms simply want time with the politician without promises of campaign contributions to go along with that vote.
I'll agree to that. Then we ought to make a law. No money can change hands no matter what.
Bob, see, you thought you and I were going to disagree, and that's just not the case.
Hey, one quick thing on the signs.
Sure.
These guys have got to quit putting them in illegal places to start with.
Oh, and I agree. And if I see a candidate that I know and I see a sign in the right of way, the DOH right of way, or on city municipal property, I reach out to him and I say, hey, don't know if it was you, don't know if it was a volunteer, but that sign's going to disappear. And all of a sudden you're going to call me and say it was stolen, and it wasn't stolen. It was just illegally placed.
Well, you and I agree on that, too. I've called twice already.
And, Bob, you'll be happy to know I don't have any of my signs on public property, so they shouldn't be out there annoying you too much, hopefully.
Well, and the law for the signs is easy. Or private property with permission. That's it.
That's right. It's really, really that easy.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Bob. Appreciate it very, very much. Let's go ahead and we'll take our final, our final break this hour, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation with candidate Shawn Fluharty. If you have questions, just like Bob had questions, go ahead and dial the digits, 304-214-1600, 866-514-1600 on WVOI, 304-232-8255-232-TALK. We'll return in a moment. I'm Steve Novotney here on the Watchdog Network. AM 1600 WKKX, AM 1370 WVOI. Welcome back to the program. I'm Steve Novotney. Shawn Fluharty, local attorney, also a candidate here in the 3rd House District. He is with me for another 9 minutes or so. And, Shawn, you and I have had conversations about being a Democrat. And, in West Virginia, a lot of people believe a Democrat is no longer blue, but instead has turned purple. Do you see it that way?
Well, I would tend to agree with the purple assessment. I mean, we usually have Democrats that run on a Democratic name and then don't run on Democratic policies. That's really holds true, at least in recent politics. That's
right.
Kind of like the Joe Manchin game plan is what I call it. But, that's not the Democratic Party I subscribe to. If you want to say, well, for the past X amount of years, our state's been under Democratic rule, and look where we rank in many key areas. My answer to that would be, as I addressed earlier, our state's been under corporate rule by a select few. Bob Murray plays a bigger role in our state's legislature than any delegate, any senator. Don Blankenship played a huge role prior to his ousting, and they're the ones who truly control this state. That's where the money goes, and based on Bob's phone call, I mean, it's a concern for citizens. And that's there. You want to talk about lobbyists? There you go. Point in that direction. You want to talk about the influence Bob Murray has had? I just read today that he's cutting employee benefits for retirees at 1,200 console miners.
That's right.
Now, that's horrible for those 1,200 families.
Yes,
it's
it is.
devastating to the families. It's devastating to our state. It takes away from revenue. It takes away from expenditures in our state. And at the same time, if you look at the article, who protected those 1,200? They weren't union members. Now, you want to say that we need to switch and hurry over to the Republican ticket because we've been under Democratic rule, and I would say proceed with caution, because as soon as we become a right-to-work state, that 1,200 number quadruples because those union miners will not be protected. So be thankful that it's only 1,200 when somebody like Bob Murray takes over and buys mines after talking out one side of his mouth and doing another. I mean, on one end, he says how that coal's being crushed by policies of the EPA, and on the other hand, he's buying coal mines. It just doesn't make sense at all. He's a capitalist, he's capitalizing, and he's a businessman making business decisions.
Shawn, a lot of people say, well, give the Republicans a turn here in West Virginia. West Virginia has been under Democratic control for the last 60 years. Give the GOP a chance.
And I caution that. I mean, we already are under conservative establishment here in the state of West Virginia. Just because we have Democrats in name, it doesn't necessarily mean Democrats in policy. I think if you look at our social issues, we are definitely conservative in those. And then if you look at the Gallup poll recently in 2013, we were one of the most conservative states, and that's based upon policy, not based upon any social issues. So just because we have people running on a Democratic ticket who in large part run because we are a history of deep Democratic voters, not necessarily the rule and not necessarily the policy. And that, I would say, we basically are a very conservative state at this point.
What do you think of the Republican push, especially in the House of Delegates?
I think it's a byproduct of the national trickle-down effect that we're having in politics. And we've gotten away from talking policy. Everything's sensationalized. And sensationalism is winning out. Republican tickets taking advantage of the anti-democratic sentiment nationally here in the state of West Virginia. And that's just kind of the byproduct of it. It's the natural evolution when it comes to politics. And I don't think I subscribe to anybody in particular. If anybody knows me, they know that I'm a straight shooter. I shoot from the hip. If you give me an honest question, I give you an honest answer. And it doesn't matter to me if it's to a Republican or a Democrat. You can look at who supports me. It's from a varied group of individuals and people that I believe in. I do not simply turn myself purple to win elections. I probably could have done that by now, but I'm true blue. I'm old school. I subscribe to the old Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy kind of mentality. Robert Kennedy pushed the civil rights movement at a time when it wasn't popular. John F. Kennedy looked to the future, and he told us not to subscribe to the conservative Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but the right answer. So speak your mind, and let's find the right answer. And that's kind of how I flow from. I don't really prescribe to this new type of politics. I'm old school. I may be younger than most of my opponents, but my mentality is definitely old school.
Now, let's say you get through the primary and you get into the general. Do you fear having to run against Barack Obama? I could see that happening because, like I said, the national politics trickles down. I suppose that's still an issue, but I don't think he's running again, I'm pretty sure. So I don't know why it would be, and I'll explain to the voter, look, that's sensationalism at best, and I'm not going to subscribe to sensationalism. Let's say you get elected, Shawn Fluharty. Is your first session a watch and learn session, or would you go down there and start proposing some bills?
I watch and learn now. I mean, I can look at the policies that have been in place. I can look at the bills that have been passed, and I can learn and learn while and wait. And that's what I would do. I'd go in and I'd start. Like the severance tax issue we've discussed. Why hasn't a bill been proposed? I know they've proposed a bill relating to how we deal with the severance tax, but not a statutory raise, which is what needs to happen. So no, I would be proactive, and I think that would kind of void my first session. You only get two sessions before you're up for re-election again. Why would you go in there and sit on your can? I don't understand that one.
And you and I are on the same page there. By the way, when you were pounding the pavement going door to door, anybody have concerns about public education in West Virginia?
I had a former, it's funny you asked that, Steve. I had a former teacher of mine that was one of the doors I knocked on last night. And I won't say her name because she probably doesn't want it on the radio. But I was like, hey, do you remember me? And yeah, I remember you, which I don't know was good or bad based upon the time that I had her in junior high. But, I told her we've had some budget cut. We're talking about public education. We've had some severe budget cuts in our state, and we cut off like $425 million from public education. And the biggest cut is not necessarily public education, but higher education. And as somebody who's paying back $75,000 in student loans right now, that's a concern for not just myself, but for keeping young people in the state. As we cut back from higher education funds, West Virginia University lost like $10.4 million from state funding just last year. And the result of that is higher tuition costs. And there's no way around it. When students are paying higher tuition to attend college, the odds of them getting out of school and being able to buy a home, being able to buy a car, being able to contribute to society monetarily is greatly impacted if they're sitting on a student loan debt like I am, like many other students my age are. And that's why a lot of people leave the state of West Virginia, because they leave for greener pastures in the sense that they want to make more money and there's more jobs available elsewhere. And that's a huge concern for me.
Yeah, the American dream is certainly in trouble, if not already dead.
Well, speaking of our state in itself, is dying because we're losing more people than we're gaining. More people. Forbes magazine said we're the 4th ranked state as far as young people fleeing the state. So people are fleeing in greater numbers than there's only 3 states better than us as far as who they're leaving first. So that's a concern, and we need to address that. And we're not going to address that by cutting on higher tuition. We're cutting on tuition costs.
Real quick question, quick answer. There's 3 Democrats in the primary. How do you set yourself apart?
I believe I'm the most knowledgeable, and I believe I'm blatantly honest when it comes to the questions that I'm asked, for better or worse. And I've really done my homework. I think we have 3 great candidates. I'll say that, Steve. I have nothing against the other 2 running. And I think the society as a whole will be served well by all 3 of us. But I've really put in the work. I've really educated myself. I take pride on knowing the issues. And I take pride on being honest about my stance on the issues. And I really think that separates me from not just those who I'm running against right now in the primary, but from all candidates.
Good stuff. Thank you, Shawn Fluharty. Shawn Fluharty, ladies and gentlemen, a local attorney, a Democrat, and a candidate for 3rd House District.